Hello friends, how are you doing today? So in this video we are going to talk about app deployment in Kubernetes. Okay, and before going to the core topic, I just wanted to touch upon what exactly the enterprises are doing currently. Okay, so the major enterprises or organizations, what they are doing in terms of their application deployment strategy, they are moving away from their legacy way of deployment to modern way of deployment. Okay, and they are moving away from deploying their application to Linux server legacy ways or Windows server legacy ways to the modern ways of deployment, and also they are migrating their app server running on the VM machine or any Linux or Ubuntu server into a container, right? And also the manual way of deployment is going away and they are adopting Cicd pipeline and also the automated way of deploying the application, right? So one of the best ways of app deployment is containerizing the application and running your application in any of the Kubernetes containers or OpenShift container platforms. Okay, so let's start with how you can deploy your application inside a Kubernetes container orchestration platform. Okay, how this Kubernetes app deployment architecture will look like, right? Suppose if you are having an application running on your legacy environment or any new application that you are building, right? Whatever the application you are planning to containerize or moving to Kubernetes cluster, this is how the architecture will look like. Let's draw the architecture. Okay, so first thing is your code base, right? Your code base will be lying in the Git repository, and let's pull the code base first, right? So from code base we just commit the code and we will use CI/CD pipeline to build and deploy the code, but in our case we are going to build the war file or EAR file from the code base. Okay, so after building war file or EAR file by using your CI/CD pipeline from your code base repository, what you will do, you will create a Docker image. So for that you need to create a Docker file. Okay, so basically when you create an image from your war or EAR file, you use Docker file to build the Docker image, and then create a Docker image and store it into the Docker container, right, or Docker container registry. Store the image into Docker container registry. Okay, and after storing into Docker container registry, what you will do, you will create the Kubernetes manifest file to push this image or build this image as a container image and push into the Kubernetes cluster. Okay, let's create a Kubernetes cluster environment now. So Kubernetes cluster will have nodes, right? Master node and worker node. I'm going to put this one, making it as a So this is our master node and worker node inside the cluster. Okay, and I will write a manifest file and deploy my container image by pulling from the container registry in the form of pod, right? So the pod will run inside the worker node. So I created a manifest file and then I used the deploy command from inside the Kubernetes cluster and then executed the deploy. So what it will do, it will go and look for the image from image repository and then pull that image in the form of container, and then it will deploy that image inside the worker node. Okay, and what will happen after deploying your application in the form of container wrapped up by the pod? Your pod may have like one or more containers and it will run inside the Kubernetes cluster. And suppose if you want to make some changes to your pod configuration, what you will do, you will read your deployment.yaml and you can make all the configuration changes like whatever you need, right? For example, if you want to have a replica of 2, you can configure that replica of 2 pods. So when you change that configuration file to have 2 replicas, what will happen, your pod will get replicated into 2 when you run the deployment. Okay, and similarly you can make other changes like where do you want to pull the image from, whether this in container registry, or if you have any kind of cloud container registry, you can pull that image from cloud container registry as well, right? So that kind of changes can be done in your deployment YAML, and then you can pull wherever the image you want to pull from. Okay, so this is how you will deploy your app inside the Kubernetes cluster and run your application from inside the cluster. Okay, so basically when you deploy your application into Kubernetes cluster, you can do in multiple ways. Okay, one, in the manual deployment, okay, where you will not have any Cicd pipeline or any automated deployment features, right? So in this case, what you will do, you will not have the Cicd, and what you will do, you build your var or ER file manually and then upload into and build your Docker image from that and upload into Docker Hub, and that will store in the container registry, and you will pull from there and deploy into your Kubernetes cluster manually. Okay, that is one way of deployment. And the second way of deployment is using CI/CD pipelines. Okay, so this way is little automated. So what you will do, this is the one you are seeing it here in this diagram. Once after committing the code, then your CI/CD pipeline will get triggered and it will create var ER file, and you can create your automated file to create the Docker image and store it into the Docker registry, and then you can pull it from there and deploy into Kubernetes cluster. Okay, And there is another way to do this app deployment in Kubernetes cluster. Okay, so that is automated way. Like there are tools available, advanced tools for automating your deployment. So the tools like GitOps are like readily available in the market. What you need to do is just configure and then make sure that your deployment is automated based on the code changes happening on the Git repository. So you don't need to do anything. If you make any change to the code, the GitOps will monitor your code changes and then it will deploy your modified code inside the Kubernetes cluster. Okay, so these are all the major categories of app deployment: manual way using CI/CD and advanced tool like GitOps. Okay, and if you adopt any of these deployment model, manual or CI/CD pipeline, or using advanced tool, you still need to go with any of these categories. In the rolling update deployment, how it happens: suppose if you have a change to your code, right, then you will get a new image. Then there will be old image running on your Kubernetes cluster, and you wanted to introduce the new change to the customers, right? So instead of replacing all the old parts, and go with new parts, what you will do, you will roll the parts. First you replace one part with a new part, and after the new part getting request from the customers, and then after some time you will gradually increase the rolling way of introducing a new part and replace the old part. So suppose if there are 10 parts running and you made some code changes and you wanted to replace those 10 parts with the new code changes, what you will do, you will do a rolling update of replacing part by part. Okay, the blue green deployment works in this way. Like suppose your production code is running and you found a bug and you have to create a new image with the updated code, and after building the new image, what you will do, you will deploy that in a similar environment, another cluster, Kubernetes cluster, and then gradually shift the traffic from the old cluster environment to the new cluster environment. Okay, so where suppose the new code receives like almost 80% of the traffic and there are no issues, and what you will do, you will move all the traffic from your old cluster to the new cluster. Okay, and canary deployment is the similar way of having two clusters and running your new code in your new cluster and another existing code or stable code in another cluster. And what you do, you gradually shift the load from the old image to the new image. Okay, and A/B testing is similar to blue-green deployment. And what exactly the shadow deployment is? Suppose you found a bug in production where your application is running inside the cluster, and you wanted to fix that bug and release a new image, right? So you will follow the same steps mentioned here, and you will get the new code. And in this way of deployment, what will happen, you will maintain two images. One is that existing image and another one is your new image built and running inside another cluster. And you receive the request to the existing cluster and then pass it on to the new pod where you have deployed into the cluster, right? And request will come to the existing pod, and it will get passed to the new pod, and the new pod will send the response to the customer. Okay, so basically the shadow means hiding, right? Your new code will hide in another pod, but the request from the customer will not change, right? It will just come to your old pod and it will get passed to the new pod, and the new pod will send the response back to the customer. Okay, so there are benefits in each of these deployment strategies, and it depends on your business use case and requirement. Okay, and you can explore more about this in your the kubernetes.io site, and you can I have provided all the links for helping you to deploy your application inside Kubernetes cluster, and all the best practices and whatever we followed when we were deploying an application as a container farm inside the Kubernetes cluster for some of my projects. So make use of this, and if you like this video, give a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. In this Architect IT Cloud channel, we can make you to hands-on with all the architectures. It's like how I have done today by creating a simple deployment architecture diagram. The similar way we can create multiple architecture diagrams for different types of requirements, and I'll post those updates in this video and in the upcoming videos as well. Okay, so hope you have enjoyed this session, and enjoy your rest of the day. Take care.